Hi everyone, so in this lesson we are going to look at feminism and the family. Firstly, we're going to recall key terms associated with feminism. Then we're going to look at the 4 different feminist approaches to the family. And then lastly, apply our knowledge to a 10-mark exam question. So firstly, I've got some key terms here that are associated with feminism generally. And what I would like you to do is to make a paragraph that tries to incorporate all of these key terms. Now, the ones in green you probably know already. The ones in yellow you may know, certainly patriarchy, hopefully we do know. And then the ones in red maybe are new to us, so may require you to do a bit of extra research. So I just want to go through the red ones particularly, just in case you are watching this video tutorial and you need a bit of help with that. So political lesbianism is the idea that one acts or one chooses to be a lesbian or chooses to reject heterosexual relationships because it's the belief, usually from a radical feminist perspective, that women who have relationships with men are always going to be oppressed in that relationship. So they actively reject heterosexual relationships. Marxist feminism is actually one of the key types of feminism that we're going to look at in this lesson later on. But essentially, Marxist feminists look at class oppression alongside gender oppression. So they're looking at how working class women in particular are more likely to be oppressed in a capitalist society. Patriarchy, we should know, is a male-dominated society. And separatism is, again, it's usually linked to the radical feminist belief, but essentially it's that idea that we should live separately, men and women should live separately. And this is because, again, it's that radical view that perhaps any interaction with men is going to lead to oppression of women, because there is some innate psychologically deep-rooted misogyny that's embedded in our brains. And so anytime that men and women interact with each other, there is going to be some sort of oppression. So they believe that they should live separately. Hopefully we know the ones in green, so I won't go through those, but if you're not sure, you can email me or you can just Google those. So looking at the task then, the main task is looking at page 193 to 194 of the textbook and filling out this table. So I'm just going to go through them generally so that you've got some idea, and then if you need to use the textbook, you can. So as I said, the outline for Marxist feminism is the idea that Marxist feminists say that the main cause of women's oppression in the family isn't men, but it's capitalism. So capitalism oppresses women in the household. So firstly, women reproduce the labour force. So women are not paid to have children and raise them, yet usually it is them that are the ones responsible for raising children in the household in a relationship. And so through their unpaid domestic work and raising the next generation, they are doing it for free, and they're actually servicing capitalism by doing this. Because capitalism needs workers in order to survive. It needs to have workers in order to profit from them. The second way is that women absorb the anger that otherwise would be directed at capitalism. So in a sort of stereotypical nuclear family, the man would go out to work and do the instrumental role, and he would come home and he might be frustrated by the oppression he faces at work. And the woman is there to absorb that anger, according to Marxist feminists. So Fran Ansley is the sociologist that you want to put in this box, and you can quote her phrase, takers of shit, where she says that women essentially take the frustration that the husband's experience caused by capitalism in their work. So the man might suffer alienation and exploitation at work, and the woman's job is there to try to soak up that anger. And Marxists, they would say that this explains why women are more likely to be the victims of domestic violence and abuse at home. And then lastly, women are the reserve army of cheap labour that can be taken on to do extra work when needed. And when they're not needed, employers can let them go and they can return to their primary role as an unpaid domestic labour. So that might explain why women are more likely to do part-time work or lower skilled work because they are perhaps less needed by capitalists. In terms of your evaluation, you can obviously say that perhaps their ideas about the family life are too stereotypical, too old-fashioned. Are women and men really segregated in that way, with the man going out to work and the woman doing all the unpaid domestic chores? Marxist feminists also say the solution to all of this is to abolish capitalism, But actually, we can argue that if we abolish capitalism, we actually are abolishing a way of life that many people are actually quite happy with, and so this might not be a great solution. So that could be another criticism. The next type of feminism is radical feminism, and radical feminists essentially say that all societies have been founded on patriarchy, and women in terms of the family are the ones that are being exploited. They say that men are the enemy and are the source of women's oppression and exploitation, and the family and marriage in particular are a key institution in maintaining patriarchy. So men benefit from women's unpaid domestic labour, and they dominate women through domestic violence and sexual violence, or at least the threat of those things. So feminists that are radical would say that the patriarchal system needs to be gotten rid of, and they say the way to do this is through separatism. So women must organise themselves to live completely separate to men. And radical feminists argue also for political lesbianism, where heterosexual relationships are seen as oppressive. Germaine Greer is the name of the key sociologist that you can use here, who advocates for matrilocal or sort of female-headed households. In terms of your criticisms, you could say that obviously they have an overwhelmingly very negative view of the family, which actually most people would probably disagree with. We can say that actually women are, they have access to lots of paid employment, they are more equal than they ever were. They have more control over their own fertility, and they can choose whether to marry or cohabit. So actually, a lot of the things that radical feminists are saying are overwhelmingly not true. In terms of liberal feminists are probably the biggest group of feminists, what most people would associate with feminism, in the sense that liberal feminists are essentially concerned with trying to ensure that there's equality legally for women. So they would say that women's oppression needs to be overcome through changes to the law. So we already know some of those changes to the law, such as the Sex Discrimination Act and the Equal Pay Act. And in terms of their view on the family, you can use the sociologist Wilmot and Young, who essentially say that through the march of progress perspective, we haven't quite yet reached full equality, but we are on the way to doing so, and that actually the family life has become far more equal. Men are doing more domestic labour than the past, and parents are now socialising their sons and daughters more equally in the household. However, a lot of feminists would criticise the liberal feminists for being too positive, for almost seeing society as too equal, and they believe that we have a long way to go still to achieve equality for women. And then the last perspective is difference feminism or intersectional feminism. So essentially, intersectional feminists think that women's experiences are varied, and you can't club all women's experiences together as one whole. And that's because actually we need to look at differences in terms of lesbian and heterosexual women, white and black women, middle class and working class women, because all of these groups experience what it's like to be a woman very, very differently. So some are doubly disadvantaged. So if we think about black women in particular, they are disadvantaged through discrimination in terms of their race, but also discrimination in terms of their gender. And they have a very different life experience compared to perhaps a white woman who will not experience perhaps racial discrimination. In terms of sociologists for this, you can use bell hooks. So bell hooks talks about intersectional feminism, and she says exactly what we've just said there, that black women in particular are doubly disadvantaged. Other feminists, in terms of criticisms, you could talk about how they would say that mostly feminists are able to lump all women together, because actually there's more things that women share in terms of their experiences compared to their differences. So many women share the same experiences in terms of their risk of domestic violence and sexual assault, in terms of low pay and so on. So again, if that wasn't enough information, go back to the textbook and have a look at those pages to fill out the chart. So questions. So if you could please, as a recap of what we've done so far on theory and the family, have a go at answering these questions. There's also a challenge task here. It's on a theory that we haven't looked at yet, but we will come to later. So see if you can answer that as well as a stretch and challenge activity. And I'll mark these once you've uploaded them. And lastly, we've got an exam question that I want us to have a look at. It's a 10-mark question based on feminism. So with the 10-mark question, remember you get an item and you must refer to the item twice in order to secure above 3 out of 10. If you don't use the item, even if your answer is really great, you won't get any more marks than 3 out of 10. So in terms of the item, I've highlighted the two parts that you should use. So radical feminists emphasise the patriarchal nature of family life and the ways in which men exploit and oppress women within families. So clearly we can see that the item is asking us to really allude to radical feminism in paragraph 1. So I've outlined what you should do. And then in the second section, others are critical of radical feminist views and point to the changes that have taken place in family life, such as the rise of the symmetrical family. And the concept of the symmetrical family, remember, is when roles are shared equally in the household between men and women. And that really relates to liberal feminism and the March of Progress view from Wilmot and Young. So you can use that here in the liberal feminism paragraph. So how to analyse two feminist approaches to the understanding of family is very open. You're essentially just saying what are the perspectives really saying about family life. So for paragraph 1, what do radical feminists say about the family? So I might start by saying radical feminists have an overwhelmingly negative approach to understanding the family. My evidence, I would give a sociologist to support. I would then explain their ideas using key terms and I would reference the item. I would quote the item to make sure that the examiner knows that I've used it. I would refer back to question. This shows that they have an overwhelmingly negative view. And then I'd give a criticism, and I've obviously talked about the criticisms previously. You can also relate criticisms to a previous theory that we've looked at, perhaps functionalism, because functionalists, remember, would have a much more positive view of family life and would be critical of radical feminists in that regard. And then paragraph 2, liberal feminism, it's all the same structure. And again, you might want to criticise from perhaps a Marxist perspective. What would a Marxist say about the liberal feminist perspective? And maybe they would talk about how liberal feminists are very overwhelmingly positive, and Marxist feminists and Marxists generally would say that, you know, family life is much more negative. So have a go at answering that question there. Upload your answers to the grid, the knowledge check questions on the previous slide, and your 10-mark answer, all to show my homework, and I will mark them for you. Thanks very much. Bye.